Hi everyone. We're going to talk about connective tissues. And connective tissues are one of our four major tissue types. And it tells you here that connective tissue is diverse in structure and function, but all types have three similar components: specialized cells, ground substance, and protein fibers. And the term I like to use, and it's used a little bit later in this chapter, is the ground substance and protein fibers is something called matrix. So connective tissues are somewhat unique that they have cells, but in between the cells, they have this other material that has some chemical substance, this ground substance, and fibers, depending on the type of tissues. And we'll talk about that. Because of there's a lot of variety in connective tissues. It says the ground substance, or that stuff in between the cells, can be from solid to semi-solid to fluid. So that's going to have a big impact on what kind of tissue it is. And here's a nice little diagram that's talking about connective tissues. And they're showing you, here's some cells, here's some fibers in between. And remember, the fibers and the ground substance together is something we call matrix. And so we're going to talk about some of these different things, and you can come back to this diagram. A couple of the fibers that are really important is I have right here that some of the fibers in between the cells in connective tissues are collagen fibers. And collagen actually is the most abundant protein in the body. And it's really strong. It gives your organs their shape. It gives your skin its strength. So the reason why I can't stretch my skin any farther than that is because the fibers in those tissues there's a lot of strong collagen fibers. Another really common kind of fibers in connective tissues are these elastic fibers, and they give the tissues some flexibility and allow the tissues to stretch and go back to their original shape. So we're going to talk a little bit about the types of connective tissues. And you see this book puts them into fluid, supportive connective tissues, and fibrous connective tissues. So we're going to look at these different kinds. And let's talk about the fibrous. Here is talking about the ground substance and the fibers together form a matrix. And the kinds of fibrous connective tissues, I wanted you to notice, I have loose fibrous connective tissue and dense fibrous. And the other ones, let's see what I have on your handout: loose, dense. I have tendons and ligaments. I'm going to talk a little bit about hyaline cartilage and about bone and adipose. So all these we're going to talk about. And so what you can see here is this loose fibrous connective tissue. And you might hear it called areolar connective tissue. But that's a connective tissue that's kind of binds the skin to the underlying layers. And you might have seen that kind of white stringy stuff that connects, like if you're pulling skin off a chicken when you're cooking. It's kind of stringy white stuff in between. And that's what this is, this loose fibrous connective tissue. So here's some cells. And then in between the cells is the matrix with the fibers and the ground substance. So that's a connective tissue, a loose fibrous connective tissue. The one over here, dense fibrous connective tissue, and they're showing you here in this picture that is actually a picture of a tendon in a knee joint. And so there's a lot of fibers in dense fibrous connective tissue, and in a tendon's going to connect the muscle to the bone, and they're only going to be pulled in two directions. Okay, they're not going to be pulled in multiple directions like that loose connective tissue. So all the fibers are running the same direction. And here's the cells related to that connective tissue. But there's a lot of collagen fibers there, and they're going to run in the direction of the tendon and be really strong. Another kind of connective tissue that we have is cartilage. And here's the cells, just like other connective tissue, they have cells and then a matrix, stuff in between. This matrix doesn't have a lot of fibers. Cartilage is kind of more of a semi-solid matrix, and so it's kind of cushiony, and it provides cushion for our joints. The other thing kind of notable about cartilage is it doesn't have a very big blood supply. So if you have a knee injury where you damage the cartilage, you can't get a lot of nutrients there very quickly. And so cartilage is very slow to heal when it's injured. And so here they're showing you some cartilage between the where two bones meet or in the joint on the ends of each bone and provide some cushion there. So right here we have that loose connective tissue under the skin, that dense connective tissue making up a tendon, and cartilage cushioning the ends of bones. Bone itself is a connective tissue. And even though this kind of looks like a cell itself, it actually is, the bone cells are actually here, these little tick marks. And just like other connective tissues, there's a matrix where there's fibers and a ground substance. And the matrix in bone is really hard. So this is a solid connective tissue. This circle in the middle that kind of looks like a nucleus is actually much bigger than a nucleus. And it's a space running down the length of a bone where the blood vessels and nerves can go through. So bones actually bleed and they actually feel pain because they have nerves and blood vessels. And then the last kind of connective tissue I want you to notice is adipose. Now, adipose looks a little bit different than other connective tissues because it doesn't have matrix. It just have big cells connecting to each other. Adipose, another name for that is fat. And so adipose tissue stores fat for energy, but also for cushioning. So if we continue to look at this knee joint, you can see that there's fat around there connecting, cushioning tendons and cushioning different parts of that structure. And there's also some storage of fat in there. Okay, so those are all connective tissues, and it talks about those in this section. I think we can, so another kind of connective tissue that we're going to talk about is a fluid connective tissue, and that's blood. And we don't think of blood necessarily as connective tissue, but you have cells and a matrix, so a liquid between the cells, and it fills spaces, it supports the body. And so blood is considered a connective tissue. It's a fluid connective tissue. And the main parts of blood, and we'll talk about this a lot more in the blood section, but the main parts of blood are the red blood cells that carry oxygen and carbon dioxide, the white blood cells that are involved in the defense of the body, and platelets, which are involved in clotting the blood. Now, we said this is a connective tissue, so there's something in between, and that's plasma. And the fibers in blood, in the blood matrix, the plasma, only form when we're having blood clot forms. So under normal circumstances, healthy blood is not clotting. That only happens when we have when we have to stop bleeding, when we have a blood clot forming. And that's what I have about connective tissue.